On March 15th, 1767, Andrew Jackson was born in the Carolinas. At the age of 13, he joined an American militia in the Revolutionary War, and his mother and brothers died during the war, making him an orphan. Andrew Jackson had a great hatred toward Great Britain after their deaths. When the war ended, Jackson moved west to Tennessee and began working as a lawyer and acquiring land, and he enslaved laborers. In 1796, Jackson was elected as a U.S. representative, and a year later he won a seat in the Senate, but resigned within a year. Jackson acquired a general's commission at the outbreak of the War of 1812, and Jackson then had quickly impressed his troops, who had nicknamed him Old Hickory after the hickory tree. Andrew Jackson, who had served as a major general in the War of 1812, commanded U.S. forces in a 5-month campaign against the Creek Indians, who were allies of the British. After that campaign had ended in an American victory at the Battle of Topeka, which is also called Horseshoe Bend, in Alabama, Jackson led American forces to victories over the British in the Battle of New Orleans in January of 1815. That win, which occurred after the Battle of 1812, had officially ended, but it was before the Treaty of Ghent had reached Washington. So they didn't know that the war was over when they had done that, but that had elevated Jackson, and people thought of him as a national war hero. In 1817, he was acting as the commander of the Army in the Army's Southern District. Jackson then had ordered an invasion of Florida after his forces had captured some posts in Florida at St. Marks and Pensacola. He claimed the surrounding land for the United States, and the Spanish government protested, and Jackson's actions caused a debate in Washington whether what was right, what they should do, basically. Many argued that Jackson should retire or give up his position, and the Secretary of State, John Quincy Adams, defended Jackson, and in the end, that helped ramp up the acquisition of Florida in 1821. Adams used Jackson's military success in the First Seminole War to try to persuade Spain to accept the Adams-Oney Treaty in 1819, which gave Florida the United States. Jackson was really popular, and so he received many suggestions that he should run for president. At first, he didn't want to be president, but by 1824, his supporters had gotten enough support for him to gain a nomination as well as a seat in the U.S. Senate. It was the first time that American history that no candidate received a majority of the electoral votes, but Jackson had won the popular vote, and the U.S. House of Representatives was given the job of deciding between the three candidates. It was Jackson, Adams, and the Secretary of Treasury, William H. Crawford. But Crawford had dropped out after he suffered a stroke, and the Speaker of the House, Henry Clay, who had finished fourth, he gave his support to Adams, and so all of Jackson and his supporters tried to protest against that, and they said that it was corrupt, and they called the whole situation the corrupt bargain. That it was like Clay and Adams were in cahoots with each other, and so then Jackson resigned from the Senate. In 1828, Adams and Jackson faced off in another presidential election. It was one of the worst. Jackson's supporters had accused Adams of being elitist and said that while he was a diplomat in Russia, he offered the emperor over there an American prostitute. And then Adams' supporters said that Jackson was a murderer, and they pointed out that Jackson unintentionally married his wife Rachel before the divorce on her prior marriage was finalized. And then Andrew Jackson, after all that, he won the election easily, but Rachel Jackson died before he was inaugurated, and Jackson never forgave the people who attacked his wife's character during that campaign. During Andrew Jackson's presidency, during his presidency, he claimed to represent the interest of ordinary white Americans against the country's powerful and rich and powerful. This stance would lead him and his followers into a series of terrible political hardships. So now here's a video of Andrew Jackson.
I think a lot of people see Jackson on our currency and assume that he was a great president. He was an influential president, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he was great.
When Jackson becomes president, American politics is in a moment of change. That's a moment when party politics, in a way that we now would recognize it, is on the upswing. Before that point, there were partisan alliances, but there wasn't kind of an attempt to have any kind of organized system.
There's greater engagement with politics. The participation in elections are going through the roof. As more Americans voted in elections, we see the campaigns becoming uglier and more divisive. And Jackson's was by far the most divisive up until that point.
Suddenly, it's like it's kind of a team sport. So he comes in, and the message that he has is a sort of, I'm for the common white man message. He poses as a different kind of a leader, and that message plays well at that time.
Up until Jackson, many presidents said that the legislature represented the people. And what Jackson said is, no, you've got it all wrong. The president is the only person who represents all of the people. It's only the president that is elected by the people at large. And for that reason, I can be more powerful than the presidency had been up to this point. And so Jackson transformed the way we envision the president and his authority.
He was a very strong leader who marched out and did what he thought he should do and didn't really think twice about it very often.
He was a general who was applying this command and follow structure to American democracy. And while that worked in some respects because he had the support of a wide swath of Americans behind him, constitutionally, it was a challenge. Many of the things he did tore down institutions that were essential to American government and also disenfranchised individuals and groups in ways that today we see as betrayals of American values.
He had some policies during his presidency that were just ugly, that were murderous. You know, he was really trying to clear Native Americans just out of the way in a cruel and all-embracing kind of a way.
The one word I would use to describe Jackson is a contradiction, because he is, on the one hand, authoritarian in his leadership style, but on the other hand, he is the symbol of the growth of American democracy because more Americans decided to become involved in politics than ever before because of Jackson.
He was a strong character, and for some people, that's what they want in a president, and for some people, that's not the kind of person they want in a president.
So I always struggle with Jackson and whether or not he was a good leader. And if being a good leader means you do what you want to do, then Jackson was a good leader. But if leaders are supposed to have higher values, if leaders are supposed to speak for American principles, then I think Jackson as president does not look so good.